Welcome, David. Lovely to see you and everybody else that's listening. We were talking about the weather. We always start these with the weather. I haven't had rain today, so I'm really pleased about that. And David's had sunshine, I believe.
I have. I took my grandson to the park.
Oh, that's lovely.
Tremendously exciting, except he's 2 and he's probably the size of a 4-year-old.
Oh.
And he promptly fell asleep in the swing, so I had to carry him home. So I think I've done my back in.
Oh, grief. And with you driving, that's not going to be very good either, is it? Okay, because you've been driving a lot today.
I have.
So we're here to talk about how do we educate children to achieve and be human. Actually, we've landed ourselves with a huge subject here because we've got 2 things to talk about, really. Being human and what achievement means.
Well, 3 things, because I think we can discuss the subject of education, can't we?
Yeah, we can, certainly. We have to have education to achieve, I guess.
Well, yeah, achievement comes in that context of what do we mean by education, and therefore what is it that we're hoping that children will do, and what does that look like?
Shall we start with the human bit though first?
Yeah, I have this great story that I've used quite a lot in some of my teaching and presentations.
Okay.
And it's about the whole of our lives. And when we get a newborn baby, we love them for who they are. We don't have any expectations of them in terms of their achievement, in terms of their knowledge, in terms of their capabilities. And our love for them is typically unconditional. Yeah. And we know that through attachment, biologically, we are attracted to our children, and for very good reasons in terms of their survival and their well-being, that is a two-way process, that there's that reciprocity in terms of us being drawn to our babies, both male and female, by the way. There is research that shows that males' testosterone reduces at the time of birth, and we love our babies. And then at some point we encourage them to start developing, and we tune into them, and those things are enshrined in the EYFS. So the 4 principles of the EYFS, the 2 most important ones for me are the unique child. And that's pretty much covering what I've said.
Yep.
And then the second element is the positive relationships.
Oh,
so those 2 things build on attachment.
Yeah.
So when we get the child into an early years setting, and increasingly that's babies that are coming in, that is hugely important in terms of making sure that child feels safe and neurologically capable of learning and developing. So the nurture, the care, what Jules Page refers to as professional love, are underpinning all of our practice. And I think we can all agree on that.
Yes, certainly.
But once that starts, we're then starting to impinge on what the government would call education.
However, I'm going to have to chip in.
Yes, please do.
However,
yes,
as a parent, with a new baby that we build this relationship up with, part of that relationship is also about supporting the child with their development.
Absolutely.
So my initial reaction when you said there's 2, I would have said the unique child and child development, you see, because I don't feel you can have the child development if you don't have a good relationship with the child, because you can't pitch it properly, you can't support them properly, you can't facilitate things. So I suppose, if you see what I mean, I've done it in a different way to you.
I think we have to look at it holistically. But those principles, and I'm talking about the written principles in the EYFS.
Yes, I realise that, David.
And, so teaching and learning is the last one. And that's where it becomes a debate about what we mean by teaching and learning. And then the other one, of course, is the environment. Now, for me, it's far more important that we talk about not the physical environment so much as the emotional environment and how children are supported in that. yes, we need to make sure that the physical environment is there and that it supports learning. But quite often I think we go straight to that, and how have we set up our rooms? Have we got children able to go in and outside to access things, and how many children have we got in the space, and all those wonderful things that Ofsted are looking at. But going back to where I started, unless we've got the emotional side sorted, unless we recognize the uniqueness of that child and value them for who they are, then we're into this conditional acceptance of children. So unless you meet my expectations, then my view towards you and my care towards you and my nurture is going to change. So I have some expectations around behavior. I have some imposed expectations from the government, from the Department of Education, for what it is I'm expecting you to achieve. And that's when we start to get into this debate. And let's fast forward to the end of life now. So we've got our baby that's loved unconditionally. And as you rightly say, we're all focused on developing that child. And that's where we get into this debate about what that looks like. But we get to the end of our life, and the government's fixation is on achievement. So, you only get one shot at your education. You need to get your GCSEs, you need to get your A-levels, we need everyone doing maths to 18. These are the things that matter, and this is going to set you up for life, and so on. When we get to somebody's funeral, what is it we talk about? We talk about, and I would suggest, who they are as a person. We don't care about the rest of the stuff. I've never been to a funeral where somebody mentions somebody's GCSE results.
It's interesting.
I've never been to a funeral where we talk about their day-to-day work in the office. It may be that they've achieved something that's notable and we'll add that in, but more or less it's, who is this person? How did we relate to them? How did they relate to us? And what was that relationship? What was the nature of that relationship? How did we love one another? How did they love their children? How did they love everybody? So we kind of end up where we started. It's about unconditionally loving somebody for who they are and identifying them as a human being. And when they die, that's what we want to remember them for. That's what we have a eulogy. We forget all of their frailties and things that they were annoying about, but we
look at the good sides, all the good things.
For who they were again. And so there's this big piece in the middle.
Okay, can I just bring a piece in about the middle though?
Yes.
Not the children, but when we've got a nursery manager looks like we've got two nursery managers. They might be owners as well. Now, you see, I feel really strong, and I talk about this a lot, and you may have heard me say it before. But the qualifications, which I believe. The better your early years experiences are, the more likely you are to get those good qualifications, whatever. And we can talk about the type of qualification, whether they're academic or whether they're vocational. Okay, there's a debate around that, because I think all types of qualifications are equal. Okay, for me, they are. Okay. Yeah. And those, whatever we have, and most people in the world get something, all right, even if it's a Duke of Edinburgh award or, something voluntary, okay, everybody will have something behind them. And when people go for a job, their bits of paper might actually get them to the interview, but it doesn't get them the job. It's the soft skills, the things that they'll be talking about at that person's funeral that actually will be getting them the job. It'll be all this, the creativity, the fact that they're inquisitive, that they can think outside the box, that they're punctual, that they have good morals and values. Those are the sorts of things that actually get them the job.
I agree. I completely agree. In fact, I saw an example last year from a guy who put something on social media that his son had got an interview having graduated somewhere, and I can't remember what subject, with Microsoft. And he was 1 out of 500 candidates that went for it. And he said that they didn't ask him one knowledge-based question. I will pick you up on one thing, Catherine, when you refer to these things as soft skills.
Oh, I think they're more important than anything else.
Exactly. But that's the terminology that's employed. And I think words matter sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, those skills are vitally important. And particularly as we move forward in an AI economy, in a world where we're having to reevaluate what we teach our children, those skills are the things that are going to matter. And to me, again, that comes back to our humanity. You know, what is it that we do that machines can't do, that we can't program into algorithms and get computers to calculate for us? And we need discernment for sure these days, because we need to tell whether what we're reading is actually true or not, or whether it's just been generated by a computer. But you've really put your finger on it with the people skills. We need people who can innovate, who can create, who can lead, who can get on with people. And you are a business lady, and I've run businesses, and we would both agree, I think, that it is vital that we have those interpersonal skills in order to run a team, in order to motivate people, in order to get them to work together. And over and above everything else, yes, we want children to be literate. We want them to be numerate to whatever level they need that. But things about problem solving, about creativity, and about having another go, about, you know, having that growth mentality.
And it's a characteristic effective learning, isn't it, really?
Well, it is. That I just think that's such a woolly term, isn't it? You know, who invents these terms and comes up with them? I challenge things because
attributes. I would say they're attributes.
I know, but we just take these things for granted and say, "Oh, we're calling them characteristics of effective." What a woolly term. They're
all the things actually that are really difficult to say if somebody's good at them or not in a world where we're looking at achievement.
And that
they're not tangible.
No. We want to have things that are quantifiable. We want to measure things. So can I just bring in Mr. Keir Starmer early on in the debate? And
go on then.
I'm not saying this.
Going to bring Trump in as well.
Maybe later. But last year, I think it was last September or October, he suddenly announced that we want a target of 75% of all our children achieving a good level of development in their early years foundation stage profile. So at the end of the early years foundation stage, when children are 4 or 5, and I think that is really something we need to take note of.
Absolutely.
They get presented with these set of questions, and I don't know whether you've looked at the profile and the questions in them, but they're really woolly. There are things like, what's the one that gets me? Responds appropriately when asked to do something. Well, what does that mean? And whose appropriateness do we go on? And the problem we've got now is teachers are so stretched in what they're doing, and they have to do these things with the children, and it's an assessment based on an individual teacher, that their version of responds appropriately might be completely different to someone in another class and someone in another school. But the issue is what they say is taken as this is the fact. And then that is aggregated up for the school, and the school is assessed on those results for the local authority up to a national figure where we've completely lost sight of any individual.
And meanwhile, the child might feel a total failure.
Well, this is the challenge, isn't it? Because we're certainly starting to label a child, and all of a sudden we've lost the unique child of the EYFS, because there is evidence now, there is research that shows, unsurprisingly, that it very much depends on the age of the child, whether they can achieve these things. It depends on whether they're boys or girls. It depends on whether they're newly arrived in the UK and they've got good language, i.e. English is their first language or not, and whether they've got additional needs. I think we all know that, but that is completely ignored. So we're all now at the end of this education stage, and initially this was a teacher assessment to inform their colleagues when their children went up to the next year. That was it. But we've now made it a national target.
Yeah.
Because, as you say, we want to measure things, and we measure the things that are easy to measure. And if we're not quite sure, then we'll just say that they are anyway.
But that's, I mean, I totally agree with you. But that's how education has always been seen. You know,
Exactly.
It was always the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Okay. And I failed miserably at school, absolutely miserably. Really badly at school.
But you've succeeded in life.
Yeah, I also succeeded at school because I managed to not be asked to read.
Right.
And it wasn't until I was 11, knocking on 12, that somebody realised I couldn't really read very well, or the schools realised I couldn't read very well.
So that's
at home, they certainly knew.
So that's your uniqueness then, Catherine. I'm just saying that
that's right.
We have an education system that goes from the EYFS, where we have these really positive relationships, we have high adult to child ratios, and we're invested in children learning through play and responding to them with really positive relationships, nurturing them. They're suddenly then put into a 1 to 30 in schools, and very quickly that moves into, we're now into academic learning, and we're grinding the mincemeat, throw all the children in, and you've now got to meet the targets as we progress.
It's crowd control, becomes crowd control, because it's the only way the teacher can keep.
It does, and there's a very full curriculum. So there isn't the time to go back and assimilate and to practice and rehearse things if you don't get it the first time, because we've now moved on to the next thing. And I know schools, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with phonics, because there's a lot of evidence to show that that's a really good way to learn. But when it's done to death, and when all the joy is taken out of it, so it's stripped down to worksheets and everybody has to follow with their finger along and chant the sounds out, it's no wonder that we have children that don't want to read. And it's amusing to me, but sad, that we now have a national year of reading, because we've realized that particularly boys are completely turned off reading. And I think
there's research to show, isn't it, that if children are pushed too early in their reading in their early school life, that they're actually turned off reading when it comes to later, still in late primary school, I'm talking about, when they're, they then need to start to research for information. They don't have the reading a bit, and they're not interested in finding out through their reading skills.
No, and beyond that, they're not reading for pleasure. And children are being brought up in a world full of other distractions, so tablets, phones, TV, and so on. And that we're having to compete with that, with the written word in a book. But they're not, as you say, wanting to research and read, because we're getting children to tick the boxes and pass the tests for the capability of being able to decode words and to read, but we've completely sucked all the joy out of it. So there's that, we're getting the balance wrong, I think, between what we term achievement and our innate humanity. What is it, again, that we want to educate children for? Is it just to tick a box, or is it that we want something that's going to enrich their lives as well, and to produce human beings that are going to add to our collective knowledge and wealth of the arts and creativity?
I'd like to talk a bit about staff in a way, because I feel that it sort of highlights. I mean, I had over 50 staff at one time, and I could have staff who were academic in the early years world. They might have a level 4, level 5. They might be teachers. And then I also ran a cash training centre alongside my nurseries. So we had 16, 17-year-olds straight out of school who had no qualifications. And it didn't actually matter what people's qualifications were. I'm not saying they're not important, but it didn't actually matter what people's qualifications were. The children went to the staff that instinctively knew how to tune into them.
Yeah.
And quite often, it would be the nursery assistants that the children would follow about. It was almost as though the nursery assistants were doing it naturally, and the ones that had been trained and educated perhaps didn't do it so naturally. All right, I'm not saying they all didn't. I'm being very controversial here because I'm making a huge judgment. But it's the same with children, I think. You know, children will learn naturally if they're given the opportunities, and that's our role. And I feel very strongly about this. This is why my software was made in the first place. All right, so that anybody at any level of qualification or any level of competence, which didn't necessarily go alongside their qualification, okay, could meet a child's needs where they were at and what they were interested in. Okay, so that's what my software, the original software, was made to help and support. Okay, and it's nearly 40 years old. It must be 40 years old, this software now. So it's sort of a child development thing. But what I'm trying to say is it will happen, the children's development will happen naturally given the right conditions. The reading and writing can come at any age later when the child is interested and wants and finds there's a purpose behind that. And I'm with you with phonics. We can introduce phonics at 3 by talking about the ant rather than the Annie apple. Can't see the point personally, you know, but in a real context, as the ant runs across the table outside with the jelly play. Okay, and then we can actually write the in the jelly if the child is, you know, has the physical capabilities of doing that, but in a playful way. So I'm all with you, David. What I'm trying to say, though, is that we're knocking out of early years education a natural rhythm which would happen with a parent and their baby. So a parent and their baby, you know, there's eye contact, they might stick their tongues out, the baby copy, you know, all of that we see. And then the parent will model, you know, building bricks or whatever it is, and they will do that naturally, as long as they have the time and they understand the importance of them, you know, the importance that goes alongside that. And I think as early years practitioners, we have a role to help parents understand how important their role is in that way. Okay, with the tablets and the phones and the busy lifestyles, and you know, we live to purchase things rather than nurture our lives. I think we're all perhaps guilty. So you know, that's my view. That's how I feel that children should be nurtured, and their development will run alongside that if people have a really good understanding of child development.
Absolutely agree with you.
And then the brain joins up properly. So the child isn't being made to write their name and they write it in capital letters or back to front or from wrong side of the page and they have to relearn it again. You know, we just make life so difficult for children by pushing on them expectations from those that don't know anything.
Yeah, but you know, again, you've touched on some really important aspects of it there, and I always refer to the 3 A's, which is awareness, attunement, and attachment. And it is those staff. If you ever go to a wedding, there's always one adult, and it's usually female, who's down on the floor playing with the children while everyone else is up dancing and having a drink and whatever. Those are the people that you want employed in your early years centre.
That's right.
Because they're the ones that relate naturally to children. And I have to say, I'll just put in a plug for men, but I tend to do that. And I get some very odd looks. So and I find it quite awkward.
But men play in a different way to women.
Well, they do, but if I do it, so if I go out with my grandson, we were in Winchester last week, and there was a huge climbing frame, and it had some laced ropes that looked like a spider's web. So I was pretending to be the spider asleep, and he was the fly. And when he landed on the web, I could run around and chase him and then eat him. And we were doing it. And then I was suddenly joined by 3 other children who were complete strangers to me, all wanting to be ate by the spider. And I just thought, this is socially unacceptable. I have to walk away from the park. I'm not allowed to do that. You know, somebody of my great age and male running around a park after other people's children isn't quite the thing. But
so for society reasons, you have to deprive those other children of that joy.
Well, I do. I do.
Yeah.
You know, there's children that are known to me. I can get away with it, and we have fun. But it's that noticing children and attuning to their interests and their joy and being relational with them, which is exactly what you're saying. And yes, obviously we need some underpinning knowledge about child development, how their brains work, how their bodies work holistically, and what those needs are, and how we can meet those. But that comes out of a relationship. And if it doesn't come out of a relationship, then we've divorced any education from, you know, their humanity. And that's not what a child is. You know, we are human beings. One of the
we're social
beings, and everything, to my mind, comes through connection, human connection, and those reciprocal relationships. Those that starts with those serve and return relationships between baby and mother, or baby and father, that you were referring to, and continues on, but only in as much as those children are noticed and given time and attention and that focus that is on them, which you don't get from tablets, you don't get from TV, you don't get from, you know, computers. It is relational. It's always relational, and it's about joy as much as anything in there. But yeah, when we talk about some of the cognitive science stuff, and they've started bringing that further down the line from secondary schools to primary, and dangerously heading towards early years with cognitive science and how the brain works and short-term memory and what it can bring in. And it's almost as if they've replaced the human brain, which is enormously complex and has an emotional element to it as much as a cognitive element, with a hard drive out of a computer. And the challenge is, how much stuff can we store in there, and then we'll retrieve it again, and then we tick the box to say that's how it works. It's not like that.
See, I think when I do webinars to overseas schools a lot, and they have their own culture of their country, and generally the countries I work with are quite how our nurseries perhaps were 20 years ago. Okay. Oh, well, maybe not. I don't know. I mean, there was a time when nurseries you didn't teach anything to children. You couldn't do any writing before school. You know, it all had to happen in schools. But then we went into a phase where it was worksheets, wasn't it? And very formalized. I'm talking about that period of time. And they're there. That's where they are. And in fact, I did a webinar for Nigeria. I've done lots for them, but I started from scratch for them, and I did the principles of the EYFS and the organisation of the EYFS and characters effective learning, and then I went into the key person. So I did it the right way around, David. You would be pleased. But my point is that I don't know what point I'm making now. Hang on a minute.
We were talking about the brain being a computer hard drive. That was my analogy. That, you know, when we're looking at cognitive science, that's what matters. In education.
Oh yes, we were talking about. I was talking about that you can still have purpose behind what the children are doing, a bit like the ants and the jelly that I was just talking about. You can set your classroom up with purpose to meet certain criteria that you want the children to learn or extend their learning without having to stand in front of the class with the blackboard, which a lot of these schools have. And it's really difficult to get that across to these, because they are, and I think we are here in the UK, but perhaps less of an extent than we were. They're pressured by parents because their parents see their education as how they remember how they were taught. Now, our parents in this country can feel that in similar ways, because we don't actually have much memory before the age of 6. So from 6 up, our education is quite formal. So a lot of parents will be expecting, or could be expecting, early years to be similar. So that's why I'm saying, I think as early years practitioners and educators, we have a role to help and support parents with their children's learning as well. I personally don't see it as just a practitioner. It's that relationship building again.
Absolutely.
That it needs to include the family, so that things can be done, they can be helped to see that things are done developmentally, rather than wanting their children to achieve these great big steps in life and missing out all the soft, I'm worried about using that word now, soft but little things.
I've challenged you on that one, haven't I?
You have. Those little things that actually help the child achieve those bigger milestones. So, but it's
I certainly relate to your experiences with African countries. I go to Kenya quite often. I do some work for a charity over there, but I quite often get asked to go and look at early years settings there, schools, and I never want to come in with that kind of colonial view of it, to say, because oftentimes as a white man, there's deference to me to say, oh, we want to hear from you. And I'm just thinking, this is your culture, this is your country. I'm not the expert on that. And it's not for me to pronounce on how you should be doing it. It is heartening to see some learning through play there. But as you've rightly said, there's a backlash from parents saying, when are you going to get on with the proper teaching? And what their experience of it was. And I think, as you rightly say, that's the same in this country. We've got a job to educate parents, and hopefully we do so kindly, and we do so inclusively, and we do so, enlightened.
I mean, I talk to nurseries every week, nurseries and preschools, and my experience is that it's not really a relationship with parents. It's a lip service to parents.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard in this day and age, isn't it? And what are preschools and nurseries in particular set up for? And if it's to, one of the reasons is to look after the children, to enable parents to go to work, then that's hard for them to come in. But I think you can give them the opportunities, so you can write things for them, you can put things on their journal, electronic journal, you can have open mornings on a Saturday, and just send things. But not everybody's going to read that. Or
no, it'll always be the parent who doesn't come to the parents' evening you want there.
There's only so much you can do.
There is. However, I still feel there is a need. I think the EYFS lacks in that respect. I feel there's a need that practitioners, the educators, need to see it as a larger role than it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting journey, because that partnership with parents is certainly in there. But as you say, sometimes that can be lip service.
Yeah.
I think when children first come in, very young children, from 9 months onwards or even younger, then it's crucial that partnership is there. It's absolutely crucial, and that needs to be set up. And for a lot of parents, they find that quite challenging. There's a lot of emotion around leaving your child with somebody else. You've got to trust those people that you don't really know. Your child has got to attach to them as carers, and then you've got to build that reciprocal relationship of trust and working together for different people coming from all sorts of different backgrounds, family backgrounds and cultures, to establish agreement on seeing how child development works and what's important. And that will depend on the character of the child, the character of the parents, and what their experience of being parented in early years was.
Yeah.
So that's huge. And I'm a real advocate for people who work in baby rooms. I think they get a raw time of it. They don't get the training they need. They don't get the support and the recognition they need. And when I hear people saying, well, babies are boring.
Oh, I agree.
Which happens, doesn't it? You know, think, come on.
Well,
Let's get on what's important here.
I opened a baby nursery, okay, just for babies.
Right.
And I had a huge problem getting planning permission because the neighbours thought it would be really noisy. Anyway, one of my team had a friend that lived in the cul-de-sac that ran sort of round behind the nursery. And she made a comment that we must be empty because she never hears a baby cry.
Ah,
lovely.
I
was so chuffed.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
So chuffed.
Yeah.
But that's what people, that's all people anyway.
Yeah.
But
what I was going to go on to say that as children age and they move up into more children within the ratios, it gets more difficult to maintain that relationship.
I agree. I do agree, but I think we have to. I think we have to do what to try and do that.
Yeah, and of course COVID didn't help. I know we're well past that now, but that actually interrupted what went before, and I'm not sure what's followed on from that. Where everything was thrown up in the air, and some nurseries aren't letting parents back in.
No, they're not, because they found it easier. Because they find it easier to, but it's not good for anybody really.
No, and then when you get to school, that will be pretty arm's length in terms of relationship. And again, I'm not blaming teachers. How can you relate to 30 lots of parents? That's really difficult to do that in any meaningful way. I always tell the story of my eldest daughter, whose house I'm in at the moment, and I only ever went to her secondary school 6 times. From the age of 3, all she ever wanted to do was dance. And we forced her to stay at school. She wanted to leave when she was 12 and go off to dance college. She eventually went when she was 16. So that was her thing. She wasn't interested in school, but she did okay in her GCSEs. She did pretty well, actually. And I only ever went 6 times. They never once mentioned her dancing. All they ever said to me was, your daughter talks too much. And I thought, A, what am I supposed to do about that? And B, tell me something I didn't already know. So it wasn't a relationship, and it wasn't somewhere that recognized what was important to her in her life. All they wanted was somebody who was compliant and could get them the GCSE results that added to their reputation. And I say that kind of cynically, but that was my experience. And I just thought, where have we come from when we drop our babies into nursery on day 1 and someone's there to reassure me and to build that relationship and that partnership in terms of nurture, to you can come in once a year and I'll tell you your daughter's a pain when I'm trying to teach.
I had a child in nursery who left nursery to go to school, and we always invited the school children back at half term in their uniforms and to talk to us. And there's 2 stories around this. And we used to ask the children away from their parents, what did they like about school and what didn't they like about school? And it was always play and work. Whatever they liked the play, but they didn't like the work.
Yeah.
Right. But this particular family got criticised because her child was too confident. So in fact, they moved her to another school. But that's what we want the children to be. We want the children to be confident and outspoken and themselves, don't we? I mean, it's such a sad life. It's such a sad life we're giving our children, I feel.
Yeah. And you've hit on a few things there.
Oh dear. So, go on.
No. I'm agreeing with you. So that confidence would be seen as not being compliant. So, a child that is enthusiastic is a nuisance because they've got their hand in the air at the front and they want to know the answer and they want to find out more. I can't deal with that because I've got 29 other children. You're overly confident. You're not sitting there quietly, you know. And I've always said that I was one of those children in class that just put my head down and got on with it. I wasn't one of
and I was one of those children in class that put my head down and didn't get on with it because it went over my head. And we were talking about phonics being proroted.
Yeah.
Okay. When I was at school, we had to learn our times tables off by heart. I didn't have a clue what the hell I was talking about, let alone being able to do anything pro-rote. Even now, I can't do pro-rote learning. I can't. Can't even learn my car registration number. Okay. Yeah. I certainly don't know my mobile phone number. I do know my phone number of when I was a child, however. But anyway.
Yeah.
But
if you kept your head down, you're not causing
any fuss. That's right.
But so you're either overlooked or you're getting on with it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the ones with their hands up who are keen, who are a bit of a nuisance, and then the ones at the back who are hitting each other.
I was going to say there'll be the group of boys because school won't fit into school at all.
Yeah. And it's always boys.
Yeah, it is, unfortunately.
Yeah. And maybe if they got to go outside a bit and run around and be a bit physical and do those things. Anyway, and it's interesting that the vast majority of teachers are female and they have an issue with boys. Anyway, we won't go into that subject.
Also, the head of the school is generally male and has no understanding of early years at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because they've got junior school or senior school qualifications.
But the other thing I wanted to go back to what you said was that distinction we make between work and play. And that is a thing, isn't it? You know, when you finish your work, you can go and play. And therefore play, and I think it was Jan de Biel who was talking about play a few weeks ago, and saying that he's no longer going to use that word because he doesn't feel it. He feels it's too frivolous, our meaning of it. But I don't agree with him. I think we all have a common understanding of what we mean by play. And in educational circles, sometimes play has been hijacked. So we talk about purposeful play and learning through play with an outcome. Well, that's not play. That's got an intention and an outcome.
Yeah.
You know, play is free and children are allowed to do what they want. And we support them and scaffold them in their learning in that, but it doesn't have an outcome for me.
Again, with my international clients, in China, when I was in China, one of the times, I have a game that I play about well-being and safeguarding. Okay. And basically you think of something that happened in your childhood. It's not a scary game. And most practitioners, it will be something negative, but we can justify it. Okay. And we can say, well, I had hand-me-down clothes because, or my parents worked all the time, didn't give me a lot of attention because, I had to share a bedroom because, okay. And we make ourselves feel better about it in adult life. Okay. That's the game. I tried to play this in China and they couldn't remember anything about their childhoods. And it wasn't that they didn't understand the game because I had an interpreter. They really did understand what I was asking of them. I said, can you not remember playing or doing anything lovely when you were little? And they couldn't. And I found that so sad.
Yeah.
Sad.
Another thing I often ask when I'm doing training is, what's your happiest memories of when you were young and playing?
Outside.
And quite often, the common thread is outside and the absence of an adult. Now, that could be a table with a blanket over it, so I'm separated off and I'm in my own little world. Or it could be I'm out in the back garden, if you've got one, or it would be somewhere else. But usually our feelings of, being in control of ourselves, making our own decisions, our own determination of what we want to do is in the absence of adults. And I find that very interesting as well, that in today's world, our children don't have those opportunities
to follow their interests.
Well,
now,
to do that without an adult supervising
them. When I try to explain what play is, or put some value on play to teachers, I ask them to think about their hobbies.
Yeah.
And I say, right, so, your hobby might be this or that or t'other. And don't you try to get better at your hobby? Don't you research with your hobby? You might have to play as a team member in your hobby. And then I ask them, how would you feel if I took your hobbies away and you weren't allowed to do them anymore? Because that's what we do to children, isn't it? When we make them to conform and they're not allowed to play.
Yeah, a lot of it is joyless. It doesn't have a great deal of fun associated with it. And again, these terms come up, fun and laughter. If you look at the EYFS, and I've done this, go and have a search for joy.
It's not there.
You won't find joy. Go and have a look for laughter. You won't find laughter. Go and have a look for fun. It's not in there. So evidently, these aren't elements of our education system. We don't value them. In fact, we think there's a pejorative there over anything to do with that, and it's part of play, and it's frivolous, and it's not work, and it's almost a Victorian ethic that says, something that's good for you has to be miserable. And you think, exactly as you've said, well, that's not, people research things. Little boys love dinosaurs and will learn all the names, and they're fascinated by it and interested in it, and it sparks something in them. And that's where we want to pursue their threads, isn't it?
Let's ask people on the chat. Come on, folks. What do you think? Do you think what we're saying is right, wrong? Do you have something to add? I haven't actually asked you to participate. I did at the beginning. Then you've gone all quiet. You could be watching EastEnders for all I know. Come on, folks.
Putting people on the spot.
Be compliant. Please write in the chat. We're not disagreeing on life, really. Are we really? We're agreeing with each other. But I don't.
No, I think that's right. And of course.
Oh, I know what I was going to. Sorry, David. I know what I was going to ask the chat. In your training, because you would have been trained later than me, did you have, the EYFS says there's no joy, there's no joy, there's no fun, but in your training, were you trained that children need to have joy, fun to enhance their learning journey, as it were? Did you have that in your training? I certainly did in mine, but I did my training over 50 years ago, so getting on for 50 years ago. So we've got great talk, learning through play is the best way. But was it in your training? Because what I'm trying to say is, it may be the EYFS is saying this to us because that's been made by, it's been endorsed by the government, hasn't it? And it has been actually, it is supposed to be well researched and thought out, the EYFS.
I think I would endorse the EYFS as a framework. I think there's a lot to be said, particularly for those principles and the 7 areas of learning. I haven't got any issue with that. I think development matters is another thing altogether. And I think I think it's when we start looking at that term achievement and what it is we're looking for our children, and the way that is monitored and inspected by Ofsted, can be separate from that. And I think we're then straying into this world of children's work, and we've got to get them onto the conveyor belt and then on into the school system. And I think that's where the danger lies, that we don't have that freedom to for children to learn through their own best ways. The nurturing
I was talking about.
Yeah, and I don't think that's universally true of Ofsted. And the problem with Ofsted, and it remains to be seen what happens with the new framework, is that it's been inconsistent depending on the inspector who arrives on the day.
I
and
hated the job.
well.
Absolutely hated the job. It was horrible.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Because that, again, like the children, you know, we set criteria for children. Well, there's also criteria for Ofsted. And again, it's how you interpret that. Yeah. And I can remember inspecting a nursery that was Montessori. And I love Montessori, actually. Generally, I love Montessori. There are parts of it I'm not so keen on. But, somebody works in the Montessori. But this particular nursery had no respect for play at all. They had beautiful equipment. They stopped the children using dustpan and brushes and brooms as hobby horses. And outside and there was nothing outside for the children. Well, everything outside for the children to play with was absolutely opposite to what I would expect in a Montessori classroom. It was dirty, unorganized, it was plastic, it was horrible. The
trouble is people can say that they're doing whatever, Reggio Emilia, Freeble, Montessori, but you've got to go back to look at the original person that started that. So, you know, what was Maria Montessori like? What was her philosophy of life? And how did she see that in her practice and going forward? And that's what we need to return to, isn't it? She was all about agency for children.
Yeah, choosing within the prepared environment.
Yeah, and so just because someone says they're doing that doesn't necessarily mean it meets up to those standards. And the other thing I think is, and here's a good question, do you think Maria Montessori would be doing today what she did then?
No, of course not.
Yeah, so, you know, we've got to bear that in mind, haven't we?
Exactly. But I'm not knocking Montessori, I hasten to add. There's a lot of really positive things there. And Frobel, I didn't realise, I went to the Frobel Trust. I went to visit one of their nurseries in Guildford. No, it wasn't Guildford. It was South London somewhere. Yeah. And I couldn't believe how Frobelian I was.
Well, don't you think we're all doing, you know, if we take a bits of everything, I've always done, you know, I've never followed one strand or another in terms of educational philosophy. Best practice is best practice. And if you look at all of those pioneers, they all had those elements in common. They all had respect for children and gave them the agency to be able to explore and learn for themselves. And it was facilitating that. And I think that's good practice, whatever you're doing these days. Absolutely. And there's different ways of doing that, but essentially that's what it's about. And I'm happy that we can still do that under the current EYFS. It's just that aspects of that have been.
And it worries me that schools are going to be having, you know, in-house, not in a porter cabin. Well, it might be in a porter cabin on the other side of the playground, but, you know, having it as part of the school rather than separate. I've got issues with that. I just think it's
well, again, it's going to depend on who the school leader is, what their culture is, what their understanding is, and their openness to learn from those that know. I mean, there are some very practical issues because I've been involved with the schools early years rollout with the DFE and staffing. Nobody can get staff. Where are schools going to get trained staff?
Unfortunately, they're going to end up being able to pay them more, and then.
But yeah, they still got to get hold of them. Yeah. Where are these trained and qualified staff that are there ready to go if they're not already employed somewhere else, and unless they're stealing them? Well, and secondly, are those environments going to be appropriate for those?
Exactly.
You know, they're repurposing school
buildings
which were built,
and it's really not. It's really not very easy. I had a nursery in a school in a porter cabin, and I mean, I changed it massively by putting an X in the middle, partition X in the middle,
right,
where the children didn't run across, if you know what I mean, and there were learning.
Yeah, I've seen things like that.
Yeah, but you know, it's really hard to make. And then you have this We'll go down to nursery. Oh,
Yes.
grief. Give
Yeah,
me strength.
that language works.
And yeah, there's lots of issues there. We won't need to go into them. But you know, there's all that. It's a totally different culture, isn't it? When I had my training centre, I said, I wish I could put a course on for the politicians. Come and learn something about early years, you know, not just visit, you know, come on a retreat for a fortnight. I know that's not long enough, but something would be better than nothing. And learn something about early years before you start putting policies in place. But we're getting political now. But, you know, that's the problem. They don't.
It is the problem.
They're judging it on, again, like I was saying earlier, on their own experience of education.
Yes.
So that's 6 and above. And the fact that they've got to prove that the money and they've got to get the votes.
Yeah.
Now, for every child, there's generally 2 parents. Okay. So that's more people voting than us early years folk. And that's another reason for educating parents.
Yeah, no, it is. And the term that we haven't really addressed so far is achievement, isn't it? We talked a lot about all the other things.
We have.
A cup of tea's arrived.
We have, in a way, because we've talked about how... Oh, you've got your cup of tea, I'm pleased.
My cup of tea's arrived.
I was thinking about your cup of tea. We were talking about criteria, meeting criteria. But when we look at the unique child, every child is going to meet criteria at different times, and I think that's the issue.
Yes, and I think it's that unique child, and you know, Ofsted wants us to see a sequential curriculum, and what do we mean by that? And I think if you ask any person working in a nursery, a preschool, or a childminder, they know those children that they're with. You can go up to them and say, tell me all about little Mohammed here or Jenny, and they will be able to tell you what they're, you know, things they're good at, things they're working on. And again, it's all that relational things. But they find that sometimes quite hard to put into words, into reports, into pro formas, whatever we're asking them for. But I think, you know, we're good at knowing where our children are at. And I think we should need to just have the confidence in that. And it's about communicating that with parents. It's communicating that with the powers that be, with Ofsted or whoever's coming, just to show that we know what we're doing. But I you know, I go to many early years settings, and often I'll have that conversation with them, and they say, oh, you know, I can't talk about achievement, I can't talk about assessments and so on. And you just say
big words.
Well, exactly. But you just say, you know, what does he like? What's this guy like? And they'll tell you everything about that child because they're spending all day with them and they've built that relationship with them.
Yeah.
And we need to just value that and have the confidence in ourselves to say, we know our children, we know where we're at, and we need to know what their next steps are, how we need to get them there, and how we're going to support them in doing that.
The only issue with that, yes, then you're right, and is when you have a nursery. When you have I don't know quite what's happening there. Don't worry. Where you have a nursery where they have lots of children that come in for a couple of mornings, couple of afternoons, and the key person has about 15 key children. You know, they're splitting their time up, and then that becomes, you know, so much information can be in their heads, but that's not very useful when they transition into the next room. Or
no, it's a resourcing issue again, isn't it? And that's the big problem with education in this country. That's the big problem we've got with special needs. We don't have the resources to meet everybody's needs, and it's always a compromise, which is why we're seeing a lot more children being home educated now, because we're not able to meet all of the individual needs of all of those children. It's impossible. However much you differentiate the curriculum, however much you are attuned to those children. If you're one adult, you know, when we went to 1 to 13, if you've got your you know, your qualification, your degree, you've still got one pair of hands, one pair of ears, one pair of eyes, and you can only relate to so many children.
Yeah, or the 1 to 5 instead of the 1 to 4.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that was supposed to save money. How can it possibly save money when most nurseries are set up as groups of 8, 16?
Yes. Yeah, yes. So, well, you know, we know all those things, but that's right. But I just think we need to reclaim early years in terms of, you know, recognizing the value of the teams that we've got. And as you rightly said, it doesn't necessarily depend on qualifications. We need staff who understand child development, but that doesn't have to be academic in the way, you know, I've got a certificate to cover that. It's more about the kind of Julie Fisher things about, you know, interacting, not interfering.
I agree. But you see, we try to professionalize. See, when I went into the profession, when I was, you know, 16, 17, 18, it was a vocation.
Yeah.
And people went into it. They didn't go into it for the money. And I still don't think.
Still don't.
Well, I mean, out of choice, I still don't think they would go into it for the money. Okay, it's poorly paid, but they still wouldn't go into childcare for the money. And it was a vocation. And then really, although I'm not knocking, I think it's important that we know, you know, we are educated as educators in the latest research, etc., and we should continue our professional development. But we started to say, right, it's much better if there's a teacher in the ratio. You know, every early years setting should have a teacher. We had at one point. Well, I did have a teacher. She was absolutely useless, really. And then, you know, people have to, and even now, you know, you've got to have maths, you've got to have this, you've got to have that. Well, a lot of early years educators don't come from that academic background. They perhaps didn't have that great experience at school. The fact that they didn't have those things actually makes them fantastic educators. And they can go on and do those things at a later date. If you see what I mean. They shouldn't, in my view, be stopped in working with, which is why I set my training centre up. You know, they shouldn't be stopped in being able to do the passion that they have because they don't have a qualification. But people in the chat might really disagree with this. This is quite, tell me what you think, Mrs. Montessori, that's in the chat. I don't know what sort of nursery the other nursery is. What do you think? How do you feel about that? Because that, I mean, not that I'm advocating for schools to go into a mum's army like it used to be. When daycare started, it was all women. They haven't actually got any qualifications. And preschools were set up by groups of women that needed their children looked after. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm saying is it would bring more people into the workforce if it could be viewed more as a vocation rather than a vocation with an avenue to progression, and a vocation that had opportunities to increase academic bits of paper.
I think we need to value care, nurture, and play as professional, you know,
perhaps that should be a qualification.
And, you know, the problem we've got is education in this country is top down, isn't it? So we talk about tertiary education, secondary education, primary education. And as you were saying, it's the language that's used. And it's very intentionally put that way, that this is where the real learning is. You know, this is the clever people in universities. These are people that getting ready for their jobs and vocational stuff at secondary level. Primary, yeah, okay, this is good. And then underneath that, we sort of drop off a cliff, don't we, when we go into early years, and particularly if that's outside of school, that's really for those that couldn't do the hair or care thing. If you failed at those, go and try looking after children. And that's why we don't get men involved in it, because we don't see that as an appropriate place for them either. Whereas, as we've both said earlier on, our babies need the utmost care and the utmost understanding of child development, and the best care that we can provide. And we should value that. We should pay for that financially, but we should, we need to turn our societies upside down to make sure we do that right. Because
actually research says the better the early years education, and it's got to be good or better, the better the children, the less money we spend on that person for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, exactly. And we're still agonizing over that and trying to pick up the pieces further down the line all the time. So Maria says,
somebody in the chat, I hold a QTS. However, at my job interview, I was asked what can I do the best. My answer was I can make Play-Doh, and I got the job. There you go.
Oh, isn't that fantastic?
Well done. And at my interviews, I don't know if you ladies are involved in interviews. I suspect you are. But in my interviews for staff, I always used to ask, what did you play with as a child? And this might be very sexist, and David perhaps won't. And I actually employed 8 men at one point, I hasten to add.
Well done.
But it was the nurturing play that they did as a child that used to impress me at interview. So whether they play with their teddies or their dolls, and if they played with trains, then I would ask them, well, what did your trains live on a shelf, in a toy box, in the box they were bought, just so that they could indicate to me that they had some care about their trains that they were so that they played with so much. But it was a really good question. It worked very well. Well, David, I think we've actually covered a lot. I've really enjoyed myself. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been grinning from ear to ear at some things you've been saying.
Have we fixed the world, Catherine?
That's the trouble. We won't, will we? Unless...
Because we're not politicians.
Well, the sector, we're so fragmented as a sector. I feel as early as people, we are too nice. We'll stick our necks out for the children.
Yeah.
But when it comes to challenging what the schools are doing, these children that I've nurtured for the first four years of their lives in my setting, we don't really champion for them when they go into schools, for example.
Well, it's really hard, isn't it? We're fighting the system. We're not.
We are, exactly. And I used to visit schools regularly when I ran my nurseries to keep in touch with our feeder schools.
Yeah.
And this is my experience, but the teachers in reception were not doing what they wanted to do. They were having to do things because that's what they were told they had to do. Now, in early years, if we really want to protect our industry in not doing what people tell us to do if it's not the right thing.
And I think that's one of the wonders of early years, that we do still have that ability.
Yeah, well, we need to keep it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. We need to protect that because that's precious. And that's where children really thrive, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
And they will continue to do so because, as you've rightly said, they're passionate people and they deserve all our praise and thanks for everything they do, which is why I'm still doing this at my exalted age.
Yeah, and mine. And mine.
I believe in it. Well,
I've got a birthday in a few days' time. I'm not looking forward to it. It's not the biggest birthday. It's the one before the biggest birthday.
Okay, well, very happy birthday in advance.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I will just say, I met David when I went on Play Iceland. I wasn't actually very well, didn't really experience everything I should have done, but it was all around play. And here we are. I don't know, that was quite a while ago we went on that.
Great.
And here we are talking about it again. So thank you very much for coming. I'm now going to play a little video about, I asked David what his first of all, the introduction that David gave me, I enhanced with some more human things. I don't know whether he'd noticed. I did ask David what were his what would the 5 books he would encourage everybody to read. And then there's a little bit about what I do.